Open it. Show them what you have.
Are you sure?
Completely. Not that. What is it?
$300 million.
You knew?
I verified everything. And I'm not finished.
Nathan Graham was 42, a maintenance engineer who spent more time fixing broken buildings than talking about himself. Most people believed he had settled for an ordinary life and was quietly living in the shadow of his ambitious wife, Liliana. They saw an old Ford F-150, a faded Casio watch, and work boots polished by years of use. What nobody knew was the plain manila envelope resting inside his worn leather briefcase had quietly rewritten his future. As Nathan stepped through the gate of Liliana's lavish garden party, she raised a champagne glass, lifted the microphone, and smiled as though she had been waiting all evening for this exact moment. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, let me know your country and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach. And if you love slow-burning stories filled with suspense, unexpected twists, and satisfying justice, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss tomorrow's story. The alarm on Nathan Graham's old Casio watch buzzed at 5:10 every weekday morning. It had been doing that for nearly 12 years. The plastic strap had faded from black to charcoal gray, and a thin scratch crossed the face, but it had never failed him. Nathan appreciated things that simply did their job without demanding attention. He lived with Liliana in a renovated brick home in Lincoln Park, one of Chicago's most desirable neighborhoods. The house had high ceilings, imported Italian marble in the foyer, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a carefully landscaped backyard. Most visitors assumed the property reflected Liliana's refined taste and successful social network. Few ever asked how much Nathan had quietly contributed over the years, and he never volunteered the answer. Every morning followed nearly the same rhythm: coffee, toast, a quick look at the weather forecast. Then he climbed into his aging blue Ford F-150 and headed toward whichever commercial property had requested maintenance that week. Nathan worked as an independent maintenance engineer, specializing in complex mechanical systems inside office towers, hospitals, universities, and manufacturing facilities across Chicago. His work wasn't glamorous. Most people never noticed him unless something had stopped working. That suited him perfectly. He believed the best engineers were invisible. If an air conditioning system cooled an entire hospital through the hottest week of July, nobody applauded. If emergency generators activated during a blackout, nobody celebrated. Success in his profession was silence. That morning, his first assignment took him to a 24-story office building near West Loop. A property manager met him beside the loading dock. "The rooftop HVAC unit is acting up again," she said. Nathan simply nodded. "I'll take a look." Within minutes, he had climbed several flights of steel service stairs, carrying a heavy tool bag. The July sun was already warming the rooftop, and a steady wind swept across the city skyline. He removed a panel from the aging system, listened to the uneven vibration, checked the compressor pressure, and smiled almost imperceptibly. Loose bearing. Simple. 35 minutes later, the building's cooling system hummed steadily again. The property manager shook his hand. "You always make it look easy." Nathan shrugged. "It usually is once you know where to look." That was how he approached nearly everything in life. Don't panic, find the real problem, fix that first. His phone rang as he packed his tools into the truck. Caller ID displayed Harrison and Locke, LLP. He frowned. He recognized the law firm's name. Very few people did. It was one of Chicago's most respected corporate law firms, representing Fortune 500 companies and billion-dollar acquisitions. Nathan answered. "This is Nathan Graham." A calm female voice replied. "Good morning, Mr. Graham. This is Eleanor Harrison. I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "No. I'm calling regarding today's closing." Nathan glanced across the parking lot. "I remember. We'll need you at our downtown office before 3 o'clock. "I'll be there. There are several documents requiring your signature." "I understand." And Mr. Mercer asked me to remind you not to be late. Nathan smiled faintly. I won't. The call ended after less than a minute. He slipped the phone back into his pocket as though nothing unusual had happened. To anyone watching, it looked like another routine business call. Nathan preferred it that way. He drove across the city toward his next assignment. Meanwhile, several miles away, Liliana Graham was standing in the center of their backyard, directing a team of decorators. No, the orchids go beside the fountain. She pointed toward the marble patio. The champagne station needs fresh flowers. Another worker approached. The caterer wants to know where to place dessert. Near the pergola. Her movements were quick, confident, controlled. Liliana loved events because events created opportunities. Every invitation was an investment. Every conversation could become another connection. Every photograph posted online strengthened the image she had spent years building. She wanted people to believe she belonged among Chicago's wealthiest families. Image mattered, appearances mattered, status mattered. Increasingly, Nathan did not. When they had first married, Liliana admired his calm personality. She used to tell friends he was dependable. Somewhere along the way, dependable became boring. Quiet became embarrassing. Content became unambitious. She rarely criticized him in private anymore. Instead, she made small comments during dinners with friends. Nathan never wore the right jacket. Nathan still drove that old truck. Nathan refused to buy a luxury watch. Nathan never cared what people thought. Each remark drew polite laughter. Nathan usually smiled, changed the subject, or simply continued eating. The narrator could see what no one else noticed. Nathan heard every word. He simply chose not to answer every insult, because experience had taught him something. Arguments satisfied pride. Silence revealed character. By late afternoon, he returned home briefly to change clothes. His work shirt smelled faintly of machine oil, despite being freshly washed. He replaced it with a clean, light blue button-down and a navy blazer that had been tailored years earlier. The jacket wasn't expensive. It fit perfectly. He polished his brown leather shoes with a cloth before putting them on. As he adjusted his cuffs, he noticed Liliana descending the staircase. She stopped halfway. You're wearing that... Nathan looked down. Is something wrong with it? It looks... ordinary. He smiled gently. It is ordinary. She sighed. Victoria and Jason are bringing investors tonight. I know. I'd appreciate it if you tried a little harder. Nathan picked up his car keys. I'll do my best. Liliana watched him walk toward the front door. Sometimes his calmness irritated her more than an argument would have. She wanted emotion, defensiveness, an excuse. Nathan offered none. As soon as he left, her phone buzzed. Victoria Hayes. Everything ready, Liliana laughed. Almost. And Nathan, he'll come eventually. Victoria lowered her voice. Honestly, Lily, you deserve someone who's at least successful. Liliana looked through the front window as Nathan climbed into his aging truck. He just doesn't understand how this world works. Victoria chuckled. Well, tonight should be entertaining. Liliana smiled without answering. Downtown Chicago shimmered beneath the afternoon sun as Nathan drove toward Harrison and Locke, LLP. Glass towers reflected Lake Michigan like polished mirrors. Business executives hurried across sidewalks carrying leather briefcases. Luxury sedans lined the streets. Nathan parked 3 blocks away instead of using the firm's private garage. Old habits. He disliked unnecessary expense. Walking toward the firm's entrance, he passed men wearing tailored Italian suits worth more than his truck. None of it impressed him. Inside the marble lobby, the receptionist immediately recognized him. Good afternoon, Mr. Graham. Good afternoon. Ms. Harrison is expecting you. She handed him a visitor badge. The elevator on the right. Nathan thanked her and stepped inside. As the elevator doors closed, he caught his own reflection in the brushed steel walls. gray beginning to appear at his temples, strong hands marked by years of physical work, calm eyes. Nothing about him suggested extraordinary wealth. Nothing suggested the meeting waiting upstairs. The elevator climbed steadily toward the 34th floor. Nathan slipped one hand into his pocket and felt the folded text message Liliana had sent an hour earlier. "Don't be late. Everyone important will be here." For a brief moment he considered smiling. He had no idea that by the end of the evening everyone important would be looking at him instead. The elevator doors opened onto the 34th floor with a quiet chime. Nathan Graham stepped into a reception area unlike anything he encountered during his daily maintenance rounds. The floor was covered in polished white marble that reflected the afternoon sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. Original artwork lined the walls. Every piece of furniture looked custom-made. Even the silence carried an expensive quality. A receptionist stood the moment she saw him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Graham." Her smile was warm, genuine. "Ms. Harrison is waiting for you." Nathan thanked her and followed another assistant down a hallway lined with framed photographs documenting some of the firm's most significant corporate transactions. Billion-dollar mergers, public offerings, international acquisitions. Nathan barely glanced at them. He wasn't interested in prestige. He had come because Daniel Mercer asked him to. The assistant stopped before a pair of walnut doors. She knocked softly. "You may go in." Nathan stepped inside. The conference room was enormous. One entire wall overlooked Lake Michigan. Another displayed a digital presentation paused on the logo of North Star Dynamics. 3 people stood near the windows. Nathan immediately recognized Daniel Mercer. Although 15 years had passed since college, Daniel's confident posture hadn't changed. His dark hair showed touches of gray around the temples, but his smile remained exactly the same. He crossed the room without hesitation. "Nathan." Before Nathan could extend a hand, Daniel embraced him. "It's been too long." Nathan laughed quietly. "It has." Daniel stepped back. "You look exactly the same?" "So do you." Daniel shook his head. "No, I just have better suits." Both men smiled. The friendship had never depended on appearances. Near the conference table stood a woman in her early 60s, wearing a charcoal suit tailored with understated elegance. "Eleanor Harrison," she said. "We've spoken several times by phone." Nathan shook her hand. "It's good to finally meet you. The feeling is mutual." Her voice was calm, measured, almost surgical. She gestured toward the conference table. "Please have a seat." Nathan sat. Daniel remained standing beside the windows for a moment, looking toward the skyline. "I've imagined this meeting for years," he admitted. Nathan leaned back slightly. "So have I." Silence settled over the room. Not awkward, respectful. Daniel finally turned around. "Do you remember that apartment on South Wabash?" Nathan smiled. "The one with no heat. And the broken refrigerator. And the landlord who disappeared every time we asked him to fix anything." Daniel laughed. "We thought we were going to build the biggest clean energy company in America from that apartment. We were 26. We were also broke." Nathan nodded. "Mostly broke." Daniel looked toward Eleanor. "I've told this story dozens of times over the years." He faced Nathan again. "But I've never said it in front of you." His expression became serious. "Nobody believed in North Star." Nathan said nothing. "Our professors liked the technology. Our friends wished us luck. The banks rejected every loan application. The venture capital firms laughed us out of their offices." Daniel smiled bitterly. "They all said the same thing. The market wasn't ready. The technology was too risky. The competition was too large. The company would never survive." Nathan remembered every meeting, every rejection, every sleepless night. He also remembered the single conversation that mattered. Daniel continued. I had exactly 8 days before payroll. If I couldn't pay 12 engineers, the company was finished. Nathan quietly finished the sentence. I know. Daniel nodded. You were the only person who didn't ask for projections. You didn't ask for market research. You didn't ask how soon you'd get your money back. Nathan looked toward the skyline. I asked whether you still believed the technology would work. Daniel smiled. And when I said yes, Nathan answered, I wrote the check. Neither man raised his voice. Neither seemed interested in dramatic storytelling. They were simply remembering facts. Eleanor Harrison opened a leather portfolio. Mr. Graham? She slid several thick document folders across the polished table. These are the final acquisition agreements. Nathan looked at the first page. The acquiring company. Atlas Horizon Industries. Purchase price. $46.8 billion. North Star Dynamics would officially become part of one of America's largest industrial technology corporations before the market opened the following morning. Everything had already been approved. Federal regulators, shareholders, boards of directors, international compliance agencies. Today's meeting represented the final legal step. Eleanor pointed toward several highlighted sections. Your ownership interest remained unchanged throughout every investment round. Nathan nodded. I know. Our records show you never sold a single share. I never needed to. Daniel smiled quietly. I kept offering to buy some back. Nathan looked at him. And I kept saying no. Why? Nathan thought for a moment. Because you always needed the money more than I did. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly. Many investors demanded immediate returns. Nathan never had. For 15 years, he accepted nothing. No dividends, no publicity, no board position, no interviews. Only quiet confidence in a friend. Eleanor turned another page. We'll begin with these 3 signature packets. She handed Nathan a fountain pen. One signature transferred ownership. Another acknowledged payment. The third confirmed tax reporting obligations. Nathan read every page carefully. That habit came from years of technical work. Never sign what you haven't read. Never repair what you haven't inspected. Never assume. After nearly 20 minutes, he signed the final page. Eleanor collected the documents. She reviewed each signature with meticulous attention. Finally, she looked toward Daniel. Everything is complete. Daniel exhaled slowly. I've waited a long time to hear those words. Eleanor reached into a locked briefcase resting beside her chair. She removed a large cream-colored envelope bearing the firm's embossed seal. Then she placed it in front of Nathan. Inside rested a cashier's check issued by First National Bank of Chicago. Pay to the order of Nathan Graham. Amount $300 million. Nathan looked at the document without changing expression. He had known approximately what the payment would be. The exact figure wasn't what occupied his thoughts. Instead, he found himself remembering the tiny apartment, the folding chairs, the leaking ceiling, the handwritten business plan spread across an old kitchen table. Daniel noticed where Nathan's attention had drifted. You aren't thinking about the money. Nathan smiled faintly. No. What then? I'm thinking about that old coffee maker. Daniel laughed out loud. The one that exploded. It exploded every morning. And somehow we still drank the coffee. Both men laughed. Eleanor smiled politely, allowing the old friends their moment. After a minute, Nathan carefully folded the cashier's check. He returned it to the envelope, then placed the envelope inside his worn brown leather briefcase. Daniel looked surprised. You're not even going to look at it again. Nathan closed the briefcase. I know what's inside. You just became $300 million richer. Nathan stood. I also promised my wife I'd be at her party. Daniel blinked. You're serious? I told her I wouldn't be late. Eleanor couldn't hide a small smile. Mr. Graham, I've represented wealthy clients for 35 years. I've never seen anyone treat $300 million like forgotten paperwork. Nathan shrugged. It's safer in the briefcase than in my hands. Daniel walked him toward the door. There'll be reporters tomorrow. I know. They'll want interviews. They can wait. What if they ask why? Nathan rested one hand on the briefcase. Because tonight belongs to my wife. Neither man realized how ironic those words would become. As Nathan stepped into the elevator, his phone vibrated again. A message from Liliana appeared. Where are you? Everyone important has already arrived. Please don't embarrass me. Nathan read the message once, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. The elevator descended toward the lobby, while inside the worn leather briefcase at his feet rested a single envelope worth $300 million. Nathan never imagined that before the sun set, the envelope would become the center of every conversation in a room filled with people who had spent years believing he was the least successful man among them. Nathan left the underground parking garage beneath Harrison and Locke, LLP, just after 4 o'clock. The leather briefcase rested on the passenger seat of his truck, exactly where he had placed it after leaving the conference room. Nothing about the weathered brown leather suggested it contained a cashier's check worth $300 million. The briefcase looked as ordinary as its owner. Traffic crawled north through downtown Chicago. Nathan waited patiently through every red light. He had never believed that arriving 5 minutes earlier justified driving like everyone else on the road was in the way. His phone vibrated again. Liliana. He answered through the truck's Bluetooth system. Hi? Where are you? She asked immediately. About 15 minutes away. You said that 20 minutes ago. There was traffic. She sighed loudly enough for him to hear. You need to hurry. I'm coming. Nathan. He waited. Please don't wear your work boots. I'm not. And don't park your truck in front of the house. Nathan glanced through the windshield. I'll find somewhere else. Thank you. The line disconnected before he could say goodbye. Nathan simply drove on. He had stopped expecting warm conversations months ago. The neighborhood surrounding their home had already begun filling with expensive vehicles. Black Escalades, silver Range Rovers, Mercedes, S-Class sedans, and several exotic sports cars lined the streets beneath towering oak trees. Nathan parked his old Ford F-150 almost half a block away. Not because he was embarrassed, because Liliana had asked him to. He climbed out, straightened his navy blazer, picked up the briefcase, and walked toward the house. Music drifted through the evening air. Soft jazz, professional musicians. Laughter floated above the conversations. Their backyard had been transformed. White tents stretched across the lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung beneath elegant fabric canopies. Fresh orchids decorated nearly every table. Servers dressed in black carried silver trays, holding champagne flutes and miniature appetizers. A string quartet played near the fountain. The event looked less like a backyard gathering and more like the opening reception for a luxury hotel. Nathan paused at the gate. Not because he felt intimidated. He simply appreciated good craftsmanship. The temporary lighting had been installed professionally. The floral arrangements were balanced with remarkable precision. Even the landscaping had been freshly trimmed that morning. Someone had invested a great deal of effort into the evening. Nathan hoped Liliana would enjoy it. Inside the garden, Liliana moved gracefully between guests, wearing an emerald green designer dress that reflected the warm evening lights. Diamond earrings sparkled each time she turned her head. Her smile appeared effortless. She looked exactly like the successful socialite she wanted the world to see. Several guests surrounded her. Victoria Hayes stood nearest. As one of Chicago's top luxury real estate brokers, Victoria had built a reputation for selling multi-million-dollar properties to celebrities and corporate executives. She spoke loudly, laughed often, and evaluated nearly everyone within seconds. Standing beside her was Jason Whitmore. At 48, Jason managed a venture capital firm specializing in technology startups. He enjoyed reminding people how many companies he had helped finance, though few mentioned the investments that had quietly failed. Richard Holloway, a polished corporate attorney, held a glass of sparkling water while discussing merger regulations with another guest. Nearby, Dr. Amanda Collins, one of Chicago's best-known cosmetic surgeons, entertained several women with stories about celebrity clients. The group represented exactly the kind of social circle Liliana had spent years cultivating. Nathan entered quietly. For a few moments, nobody noticed him. Then Victoria looked toward the gate. There he is. Her voice carried farther than she intended. Several heads turned. Nathan smiled politely. "Good evening." Victoria looked him up and down. "Fashionably late?" Nathan nodded. "Sorry." Jason glanced toward the old Ford parked down the street. "You actually drove that truck here?" Nathan followed his gaze. "Yes." Jason chuckled. "I thought maybe you'd finally upgraded," Nathan answered honestly. "It still runs well." A few people laughed. Nathan couldn't tell whether they found his answer amusing or pitiful. It made little difference. Liliana approached carrying a champagne glass. For a brief second, Nathan thought she might greet him with a hug. Instead, she adjusted the collar of his blazer. "You could have worn something nicer." Nathan looked at her calmly. This was clean? She forced a smile for the guests. "I suppose." Then she kissed him lightly on the cheek. The gesture looked affectionate from a distance. Nathan noticed it carried no warmth. Liliana turned back toward her guests. "Everyone, you've finally met my husband." Victoria grinned. "We've met before." Liliana laughed. "I know, but Nathan usually disappears before anyone gets to know him." Jason raised his glass. "Still fixing air conditioners?" Nathan nodded. "And heating systems. And generators. And plumbing if necessary." Jason laughed. "A man of many talents," Victoria added quickly. "Mostly the kind nobody notices." More laughter followed. Nathan accepted a glass of water from a passing server. He thanked the young man before taking a sip. The narrator observed what no one else seemed to notice. Nathan never searched for approval. He wasn't measuring himself against anyone standing in that garden. He had spent his entire adult life solving practical problems. The opinions of strangers rarely altered reality. Reality remained stubbornly independent of appearances. Jason continued the conversation. "So, Nathan, what exactly do independent maintenance engineers make these days?" Victoria pretended to scold him. "Jason." "What?" "I'm just curious," Nathan answered before anyone else could. "It depends on the contracts." "Ballpark?" Nathan shrugged. "Enough!" Jason laughed louder. "That's the most engineer answer I've ever heard." Richard Holloway smiled politely. "You should have gone into corporate law." Nathan looked at him. "I like fixing things." Richard nodded. "Fair enough." At least his tone carried no mockery. Victoria wasn't finished. "I honestly don't know how Lily convinced you to come tonight." Nathan answered. "She invited me." Several guests smiled politely. Victoria leaned toward another woman, just loudly enough for Nathan to hear. "I would have hired a stylist first." The woman covered her mouth while laughing. Nathan continued drinking his water. Not a word, not a complaint, not even a change in expression. Liliana watched the exchange. For a fraction of a second, she considered changing the subject. Instead, she laughed with everyone else. The decision was small, almost invisible. But Nathan noticed. He always noticed. Not because it wounded his pride, because patterns mattered. People revealed themselves through repeated choices. Music shifted as the quartet began another piece. Additional guests arrived through the front gate. Among them were executives, entrepreneurs, physicians, and financial advisors. Nearly everyone greeted Liliana enthusiastically. Nathan quietly stepped aside to avoid blocking the entrance. He had no desire to become the center of attention. Ironically, that desire was about to be taken away from him. A catering manager approached Liliana. "The microphone is ready whenever you are." She smiled. "Perfect." Nathan assumed she planned to thank everyone for attending. That seemed reasonable. Instead, Victoria leaned toward her and whispered something. Liliana laughed. Jason laughed too. Amanda smiled knowingly. Nathan couldn't hear the words. He didn't try. Liliana accepted a wireless microphone from one of the event staff. She gently tapped it. The soft feedback immediately quieted the conversations throughout the garden. Guests turned toward the fountain where a small decorative stage had been assembled. Liliana stood beneath strings of glowing lights, smiling confidently. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conversations faded completely. "Thank you all for coming tonight." Polite applause followed. Nathan remained near the back of the gathering with his briefcase resting beside his chair. He expected a welcome speech, perhaps a toast. Instead, Liliana's eyes slowly searched the crowd until they settled directly on him. Her smile widened. "There is one person here tonight," she said into the microphone, "who deserves a very special introduction." Dozens of guests instinctively turned toward Nathan. He looked up slightly surprised. Liliana extended one elegant hand toward him. "Nathan, why don't you come up here for just a minute?" The sudden silence spreading across the garden felt strangely heavier than the applause that had come before it. Nathan picked up his worn leather briefcase, stood slowly, and began walking toward the stage without realizing that nearly every person present believed they were about to witness an entertaining joke. Nathan Graham walked toward the small stage at an unhurried pace. The worn leather briefcase hung naturally at his side. His polished brown shoes moved across the stone pathway without hesitation. Around him, conversations faded into whispers. Guests leaned toward one another with the quiet anticipation of people expecting entertainment. The omniscient narrator observed only Nathan's thoughts. He had attended enough corporate gatherings with Liliana to recognize the pattern. Whenever she asked him to stand beside her in front of an audience, it was rarely because she wanted to celebrate him. Over the past 3 years, those moments had become increasingly uncomfortable. She would make a harmless joke at first. The guests would laugh. Another joke would follow. Then another. Each one cut a little deeper than the last. Nathan had never confronted her afterward, not because he was afraid, because he still hoped she would eventually remember the woman he had married. He stepped onto the stage. Liliana greeted him with a bright smile that looked perfect beneath the string lights. "There he is," she announced, "my wonderful husband." The audience applauded politely. Nathan stood beside her with both hands resting on the handle of his briefcase. Liliana turned toward him. "You look nervous." Nathan answered quietly, "I don't think I am." She laughed into the microphone. "See, he's always like this." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Victoria Hayes folded her arms, already smiling in expectation. Jason Whitmore took another sip of champagne. Amanda Collins exchanged amused glances with the women standing beside her. Richard Holloway remained silent, watching more carefully than the others. Liliana looked back at the audience. "For those of you who don't know Nathan very well," she paused dramatically. "So, he's probably the most practical man I've ever met." Several people nodded politely. "He can repair almost anything." Another pause. "But convincing him to buy something new..." She shook her head dramatically. That's impossible." The audience chuckled. Nathan remained motionless. Liliana continued. "He still drives the same Ford pickup he's owned forever." More laughter. He still wears that old Casio watch. Several guests glanced toward Nathan's wrist. He refuses to replace it. Victoria smiled broadly. I've been telling him for years that successful people should at least own one decent watch. Nathan looked at her politely. It tells the time. A louder wave of laughter followed. Jason clapped once. That's actually pretty good. Liliana smiled, as though Nathan had unknowingly helped her performance. You see what I mean? He always has these simple little answers. She turned toward Nathan again. Honey, tell everyone what you do. Nathan spoke clearly. I'm a maintenance engineer. Liliana tilted her head. Come on. Make it sound interesting. Nathan didn't change his tone. I maintain mechanical systems. Jason laughed. That's one way to describe crawling around air conditioning units. Several guests joined him. Nathan neither smiled nor frowned. The narrator noticed something subtle. His breathing never changed. His shoulders remained relaxed. His eyes stayed steady. Years spent diagnosing emergencies inside hospitals and commercial buildings had taught him that panic rarely solved problems. Liliana took another step. So, what exactly were you doing today? Nathan answered honestly. I repaired a rooftop HVAC system. Victoria pretended to gasp. Romantic. The crowd laughed again. Liliana covered her mouth theatrically. And after that? I had another appointment. What kind? Nathan hesitated for less than a second. A meeting. Liliana smiled. With who? A law firm. That answer caught Jason's attention. Harrison and Locke. Nathan looked at him. Yes. Jason raised an eyebrow. I've worked with them before. What were you doing there? Nathan chose words carefully. Signing documents. Liliana laughed before anyone else could react. Probably paperwork for another maintenance contract. The audience chuckled again. Nathan didn't correct her. Not because he wanted to hide the truth, because he saw no reason to explain something she had never asked about. Liliana looked pleased that the conversation had returned to her control. You know, she addressed the audience once more. I've spent years trying to convince Nathan that appearances matter. She gently touched the sleeve of his blazer. But he honestly believes people don't judge you by how you look. Victoria nodded dramatically. That's adorable. Amanda smiled. It's also unrealistic. Jason added, in business, image is everything. Nathan listened quietly. He had heard versions of this conversation countless times. Only now there were nearly 100 witnesses. Liliana walked slowly across the stage. When I met Nathan, he had exactly the same truck, the same haircut, the same watch. She laughed. I think he even owns the same wallet. The guests laughed harder. Nathan looked down briefly at the leather wallet inside his pocket. She was right. He had owned it for almost 15 years. It still worked. Liliana continued. I've told him over and over, buy a nicer car. Upgrade your clothes. Get a luxury watch. Network with successful people. She looked toward Nathan again. But nothing changes. Nathan answered softly. I like fixing things before replacing them. Jason grinned. Except your wardrobe. More laughter. Nathan simply nodded. Apparently. The joke landed even better than Jason expected. Several guests applauded. Liliana seemed encouraged. She sensed the audience enjoying themselves. She decided to push further. You know what's funny? She looked directly at Nathan. I don't even know what's inside that old briefcase. Nathan glanced down. My papers. Victoria called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. Maybe he's secretly carrying millions of dollars. The entire audience burst into laughter. Nathan allowed himself the smallest smile. Only the narrator understood why. Not because the joke amused him, because it happened to be true. Liliana noticed his smile. "Oh, now you're smiling." She placed one hand on the briefcase. "What are you hiding in here?" Nathan answered calmly. "Just documents." Jason raised his glass. "Tax returns." Another round of laughter. Victoria wasn't finished. "I bet it's maintenance manuals." Amanda joined in. "Or coupons." Liliana smiled brightly. "You know what? I suddenly have an idea." Nathan felt her fingers tighten slightly around the handle of the briefcase. His eyes met hers. For a brief moment he hoped she would stop. Instead, she looked back toward the audience. Wouldn't it be fun? If Nathan showed everyone what's inside. Several guests clapped immediately. Jason laughed. "Come on." "Let's see," Victoria added. "Maybe we'll discover he really is hiding millions." The joke spread through the crowd. "Open it." "Show us." "Let's see." Nathan looked at the people surrounding the stage. Many were smiling. Some looked merely curious. A few appeared uncomfortable. Richard Holloway stood perfectly still. His expression had changed. Unlike the others, he seemed to recognize that the situation was crossing a line. Nathan turned toward Liliana. His voice remained calm. "I don't think this is the right place." She lowered the microphone just enough for only him to hear. "Please. Don't make this awkward." Nathan studied her face. There was no concern in her eyes, only determination. She wanted the moment. She wanted the audience. She wanted another laugh. The narrator observed the thought that passed quietly through Nathan's mind. He realized this was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Liliana raised the microphone again. "My husband always says honesty is important." She smiled brilliantly. "So?" She looked directly at Nathan. "If there's nothing special in that briefcase, why don't you open it right here?" The guests erupted into cheers. Several lifted their phones to record. Nathan lowered his eyes to the weathered leather briefcase resting beside his leg. Inside, beneath several ordinary-looking folders, lay a sealed cream-colored envelope containing a cashier's check worth $300 million. For the first time that evening, he wrapped his hand firmly around the handle. Then, without speaking another word, he slowly placed the briefcase on the small table at the center of the stage. The applause faded into a tense silence. Nathan rested both hands on the weathered leather briefcase. Every eye in the garden followed the movement. Some guests smiled, expecting a harmless punchline. Others lifted their phones a little higher, eager to capture what they assumed would become another embarrassing story to share later. Liliana stood only a step away, the microphone still in her hand. "Go ahead," she said with a pleasant smile. "Show everyone." Nathan looked at her for several seconds. His face revealed nothing. The omniscient narrator understood what passed through his mind. He wasn't wondering whether he should obey her request. He was wondering whether this would be the last opportunity to walk away without changing everything. He quietly asked, "Are you sure?" Liliana laughed. "Why wouldn't I be?" Nathan glanced across the audience. "Because once I open it," he paused, "there won't be any way to put tonight back the way it was." Jason Whitmore laughed loudly. "Listen to him." "He sounds like he's carrying state secrets," Victoria Hayes joined in. "Or maybe it's his emergency toolkit." More laughter spread across the lawn. Nathan nodded once. "All right." He unlatched the first lock. Click. Then the second. Click. The metallic sound seemed unusually loud beneath the string lights. Nathan slowly lifted the lid. Inside were several neatly organized folders, a tablet computer, a leather notebook, and one large cream-colored envelope bearing the embossed seal of Harrison and Locke, LLP. Liliana leaned closer. "That's it." Nathan reached inside. He carefully removed the envelope with both hands. Its heavy paper immediately caught Richard Holloway's attention. From where he stood, he recognized the firm's seal. His expression changed, very slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice. Liliana smiled into the microphone. So, important legal documents, Nathan answered. Yes. Victoria called out. Tax problems. Another wave of laughter rolled through the audience. Nathan ignored the comment. He slid one finger beneath the sealed flap. For a brief moment he hesitated. Not because of the money, because he knew the next few seconds would permanently alter every relationship in the garden. The envelope opened with a soft tear. Nathan reached inside and removed a single document. Thick paper. Blue security background. Official banking watermark. He unfolded it carefully. Liliana leaned toward him. What is it? Nathan looked at the document before answering. A cashier's check. Jason shrugged. So, Nathan turned the paper outward. The audience couldn't read it from several feet away. Liliana frowned. Hold it higher. He did. Victoria narrowed her eyes. I can't see the amount. Jason laughed. Maybe it's $500. Nathan said nothing. Richard Holloway suddenly stepped forward. May I? Nathan looked at him. If you'd like. Richard approached the stash. Unlike the others, he wasn't smiling anymore. He accepted the document carefully, holding it only by the edges. His eyes moved across the page. Pay to the order of Nathan Graham, issuing Bank First National Bank of Chicago. His gaze reached the amount. Everything else disappeared. Richard blinked once, then again. He lowered the document lightly before lifting it closer to the stage lights. The audience watched him in confusion. Jason frowned. What? Richard didn't answer. Victoria laughed. Don't tell me it's actually a big check. Still no response. Liliana looked impatient. Richard, he finally spoke. His voice had become noticeably quieter. Where did you get this? Nathan answered simply. Harrison and Locke. Richard looked at the embossed seal on the envelope, then back at the document. It appears genuine. Jason laughed. Appears. Richard ignored him. He examined the security printing, the microtext, the watermark, the authorization signatures. Every feature matched authentic cashier's checks he had seen during multi-million-dollar corporate transactions. Jason walked closer. Let me see. Richard didn't move. Instead, he looked directly at Nathan. May I ask the amount? Nathan nodded. You may. Richard swallowed. His voice carried across the suddenly silent garden. $300 million. No one reacted. For nearly 3 full seconds, the number simply hung in the warm evening air. Someone laughed nervously. Another guest whispered, He must have misread it. Jason reached for the document. Richard handed it over without speaking. Jason's confident smile disappeared almost immediately. He read the amount once, then again, then a third time. His eyebrows slowly climbed. What? He looked at Nathan. Is this? Nathan answered calmly. A cashier's check. Jason stared. I know what it is. What is it for payment? For what? Nathan remained composed. A business transaction. Victoria walked toward them. Oh, for heaven's sake. She grabbed the check from Jason. She expected to expose an obvious mistake. Instead, she froze. Her lips parted. The color slowly drained from her face. This, she looked at Nathan. Can't be right. Liliana took the document herself. Her smile remained, but only because it hadn't yet caught up with what her eyes were seeing. She scanned the page, then stopped. $300 million. She read it again. $300 million. The smile vanished. The microphone lowered slightly in her hand. Nathan. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. What is this? Nathan met her eyes. You asked me to open the briefcase. She looked back at the check. No. I mean, what is this payment? Nathan answered without emotion. My share. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Share of what? Jason asked. Nathan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he carefully took the check back from Liliana and returned it to the cream-colored envelope. He placed the envelope on the table. The silence grew heavier. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Richard finally broke it. Mr. Graham. He chose every word carefully. I've handled corporate acquisitions for nearly 25 years. If this document is authentic, he glanced towards the envelope. Talbot, it represents one of the largest individual payments I've personally seen. Nathan nodded. It is authentic. Jason shook his head. No. There has to be some explanation. Victoria forced an uneasy laugh. Maybe it's for a company. Nathan answered. It is. What company? Nathan looked at her. North Star Dynamics. Several people frowned. The name sounded familiar. Jason's eyes widened. North Star, the energy technology company, Nathan nodded. Yes. The one Atlas Horizon just acquired? Yes. Jason stared. I read about that deal this morning. Richard slowly turned toward him. So did I. The realization began spreading through the crowd like a ripple across still water. Executives whispered. Investors exchanged uncertain glances. Several guests quietly lowered their phones. What had begun as public entertainment no longer felt amusing. Liliana looked from Nathan to the envelope and back again. The narrator observed the first genuine uncertainty she had shown all evening. For the first time since Nathan entered the garden, she wasn't thinking about appearances. She was trying to understand how the man she had introduced as an ordinary maintenance engineer had just unfolded a document worth more than the combined net worth of nearly everyone standing in front of her. Nathan rested one hand on the envelope. His voice remained as calm as it had been all evening. I told everyone these were just documents. He looked at Liliana. You were the one who wanted them opened. The garden fell completely silent. Somewhere beyond the backyard fence, a distant train horn echoed through the Chicago evening. No one laughed. No one spoke. And then from the entrance to the garden, a familiar voice called out. Mr. Graham. Every head turned. Standing beside the gate was Eleanor Harrison, accompanied by two senior associates from Harrison & Locke, LLP, each carrying leather portfolios. She had arrived sooner than anyone expected. Every conversation in the garden died the moment Eleanor Harrison stepped through the gate. She wasn't dressed for a social gathering. She wore the same charcoal suit she had worn earlier that afternoon. Her silver hair neatly pinned back, a slim leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. Two associates from Harrison & Locke, LLP, followed several steps behind, each carrying document cases. Unlike the guests, they showed no curiosity. They already knew why they were there. The event coordinator hurried toward them. I'm sorry this is a private party. Eleanor smiled politely. I'm aware. She looked directly at Nathan. I'm here at Mr. Graham's request. Nathan gave a slight nod. I appreciate you coming. Liliana turned to Nathan, confusion replacing every trace of confidence. You invited your attorney, Nathan answered quietly. No. I asked her earlier today if she would stop by if she had time. You knew this would happen. Nathan paused before answering. I hoped it wouldn't. Those words settled heavily over the gathering. The omniscient narrator understood what no one else did. Nathan had never wanted to embarrass Liliana. He had planned to arrive, congratulate her on a successful evening, and tell her privately about the acquisition after the guests had gone home. The check would have remained inside the briefcase. No announcement, no spectacle, only a conversation between husband and wife. That plan had disappeared the moment she placed him under the spotlight. Eleanor walked calmly towards the stage. "Good evening." Her voice carried naturally without the microphone. "My name is Eleanor Harrison, senior partner at Harrison & Locke." Several guests immediately recognized the firm's name. Richard Holloway stepped forward. "I know your work." She offered a courteous smile. "And I know yours, Mr. Holloway." Richard nodded respectfully. Eleanor turned toward Nathan. "I apologize for interrupting. I realized I neglected to give you several certified copies of the closing documents." Nathan smiled faintly. "I didn't notice." "You usually don't." A few guests exchanged puzzled glances. The familiarity between them felt genuine, not staged, not rehearsed. Liliana looked from Eleanor to Nathan. "Would someone please explain what's happening?" Eleanor answered with measured professionalism. "Certainly." She placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. "This afternoon at approximately 3:21 p.m., the acquisition of North Star Dynamics by Atlas Horizon Industries officially closed." Jason Whitmore nodded slowly. "I've been following that deal." Eleanor continued. "Mr. Nathan Graham was one of the original equity holders of North Star Dynamics." Gasps spread quietly through the audience. Victoria frowned. "Original investor." Eleanor looked toward her. "Yes." Jason immediately interrupted. "How much did he own?" Nathan remained silent. Eleanor answered. "A meaningful minority interest that remained substantially intact through every financing round." Jason's expression changed. "He never sold—" "No." "Not once." "No." Jason stared at Nathan. "Why?" Nathan answered before Eleanor could. "Daniel asked me not to." The answer sounded almost too simple. Jason couldn't believe it. "You held those shares for 15 years." Nathan nodded. "Almost 16. Victoria crossed her arms. "You invested in a startup?" Nathan smiled slightly. "A long time ago." "When?" The question carried him back across nearly 2 decades. The narrator followed only Nathan's memories. Chicago had looked different then. He had been 26, fresh out of engineering school, living in a tiny apartment with secondhand furniture and a refrigerator that hummed louder than the traffic outside. Daniel Mercer had been his closest friend since college. Brilliant, restless, always sketching ideas on napkins during lunch, while most engineering students dreamed about landing secure corporate jobs. Daniel dreamed about changing the electrical grid itself. His idea sounded impossible. Modular energy storage systems capable of stabilizing renewable power on a national scale. Most professors admired the mathematics. Few believed anyone would pay for it. Banks certainly didn't. Nathan remembered one rainy November evening when Daniel arrived at his apartment carrying a cardboard box filled with blueprints. Daniel looked exhausted. "They turned us down." "Again," Daniel nodded. "The 5th investor this month." Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee. "They say we're too early." Nathan sat quietly. He studied the drawings spread across the kitchen table. Battery architecture, power conversion systems, grid balancing algorithms. He didn't understand every equation, but he understood one thing. Daniel believed every word he was saying. "What happens now?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "If payroll doesn't clear next Friday, there won't be a company." Nathan looked around his apartment. There wasn't much to sell. An old motorcycle, some savings, a modest retirement account, years of careful budgeting, nothing extraordinary. Daniel folded the blueprints. "I'll figure something out." Nathan asked only one question. "Do you still believe it'll work?" Daniel looked surprised. "I wouldn't still be here if I didn't." Nathan nodded once. "Then I'll help." Daniel laughed. You don't have investor money. No? I have enough. Daniel misunderstood. I'm not asking you for a loan. I know. Nathan walked into his bedroom. When he returned, he carried a folder containing nearly every dollar he had managed to save since graduating. Daniel stared. You can't be serious. Nathan placed the folder on the table. If you're wrong, I'll lose my savings. Daniel looked down. And if you're right, Nathan smiled, the country's power grid gets better. Daniel shook his head. You could lose everything. Nathan answered with complete certainty. Then I'll earn it again. The memory faded. Nathan found himself once again standing beneath the lights in Liliana's backyard. No one spoke. Even the summer breeze seemed quieter. Victoria finally broke the silence. You never told anyone? Nathan looked at her. It never seemed important. Liliana stared at him. It wasn't important. You invested in a company that became worth billions. Nathan answered honestly. I invested in a friend. Those 6 words carried more weight than any speech. Daniel's success had been a consequence. The friendship had been the reason. Eleanor opened another folder. Mr. Mercer asked me to deliver something else. She removed a handwritten letter. It's addressed to you. Nathan accepted it carefully. The paper bore Daniel's familiar handwriting. He unfolded it. His eyes moved silently across the page. The narrator revealed only Nathan's reaction. A quiet smile. Nothing more. Eleanor looked toward the audience. Mr. Mercer wished to attend personally. Unfortunately, he is currently aboard an international flight with Atlas Horizon executives. She paused. He asked me to express his gratitude publicly. Nathan folded the letter. He didn't have to. He insisted. Richard Holloway looked at Nathan with an entirely different expression now. Not pity, respect, professional respect. Jason, meanwhile, appeared deeply unsettled. He had built an entire career investing in startups. Yet the quiet maintenance engineer standing beside him had made perhaps the greatest investment decision of anyone in the garden. And no one had known. Liliana slowly shook her head. I don't understand. She looked directly at Nathan. How could you keep something this big from me? Nathan met her eyes. The narrator lingered inside his thoughts. He remembered the evening 15 years earlier when he had tried to tell her about Daniel's company. She had laughed. She called it another fantasy created by engineers who knew nothing about business. She asked him why anyone would invest in a company with no revenue and no guarantees. He never brought it up again. Not because she disagreed, because she dismissed it before hearing the end. Nathan answered softly. I did tell you. Liliana frowned. No, you didn't. I told you I invested in Daniel's company. She searched her memory. Slowly, painfully. Fragments began returning. A small apartment, a dinner conversation, her own voice. You're throwing your savings away. Grow up. Buy something real. Nathan continued. You said it would never become anything. Liliana opened her mouth, then closed it again. She couldn't remember every word, but she remembered enough. For the first time that evening, she looked away from the crowd. And for the first time in years, Nathan realized that the greatest distance between two people wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in the conversations one person stopped believing were worth having. As silence settled over the garden once more, Eleanor quietly closed her portfolio. But she did not leave. There was still another set of documents waiting inside. Documents far more personal than the $300 million check. The silence lingered long after Eleanor Harrison closed her portfolio. Nobody reached for another glass of champagne. Nobody returned to casual conversation. The elegant garden that had been filled with laughter only minutes earlier now felt like a courtroom waiting for the next piece of evidence. Nathan remained exactly where he was. His posture had not changed. He hadn't stepped closer to the audience. He hadn't attempted to explain himself. The omniscient narrator observed the quiet relief settling inside him. Not relief because the truth had impressed anyone. Relief because he no longer had to hide it. For nearly 16 years, his investment had existed as a private chapter of his life. Tonight, it was no longer a secret. Eleanor carefully removed another folder from her portfolio. This contained certified copies of the closing documents. She handed the folder to Nathan. "I thought you might want them for your records." Nathan accepted it. "Thank you." Richard Holloway spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Mrs. Harrison," she turned. "Yes. I'd like to verify something." "Of course." "The cashier's check," he hesitated, "has already been cleared through escrow." "It has." "So the funds are immediately available?" "Yes." Jason Whitmore looked from Richard to Eleanor. "You mean—" "There isn't any remaining approval," Eleanor answered professionally. "No. The transaction closed this afternoon. The funds have already been released." Jason slowly exhaled. "So he actually owns—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor completed it. "Mr. Graham has received payment for the sale of his ownership interest." Victoria folded her arms tighter. "I still don't understand." She looked directly at Nathan. "Why would someone with $300 million still drive an old pickup?" Nathan answered without hesitation. "Because it starts every morning." A few guests almost laughed. None actually did. The answer sounded too sincere to mock. Amanda Collins asked quietly, "And the watch?" Nathan glanced at the faded Casio on his wrist. "It reminds me who I was before anyone knew my name." The sentence settled over the audience. No one had expected an answer like that. Jason looked almost frustrated. "If I'd had that kind of money coming, I would have ordered 3 new cars before signing the paperwork." Nathan smiled politely. "I've never been very interested in cars." Victoria shook her head. "I don't understand people like you." Nathan nodded. "You don't have to." Richard looked thoughtfully at the old Ford parked down the street. "So you've been wealthy for—" He corrected himself. "No, you've been capable of becoming wealthy for years." Nathan considered the distinction. "That's probably more accurate." "The value was on paper. Today it became cash." Richard nodded slowly. "That explains your reaction." Several guests looked confused. Richard continued. "Most people think wealth changes a person." He looked toward Nathan. "In reality, it usually reveals the person who is already there." No one argued, because every person standing in the garden had just watched Nathan remain exactly the same after publicly revealing $300 million. No excitement, no arrogance, no celebration, only quiet certainty. Liliana finally found her voice. "Nathan?" He turned toward her. "Why didn't you tell me after the meeting today?" Nathan answered honestly. "I planned to." "When?" "After everyone went home." She blinked. "You weren't going to announce it?" "No." "You weren't going to surprise everyone?" "No." "You weren't going to tell my friends?" Nathan looked around the garden. "I don't make financial announcements at parties." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Liliana lowered her eyes. The realization came slowly. Every embarrassing moment that evening had been created by her own decisions. Nathan had never volunteered the envelope, never mentioned the meeting, never hinted at the acquisition. She had insisted. She had invited the audience. She had asked him to open the briefcase. The narrator followed only Nathan's thoughts. He remembered every opportunity she had been given to stop. When he asked if she was sure. When he warned there would be no going back. When he suggested they discuss it privately. She had refused every exit, not out of cruelty alone, out of confidence. She had been certain there was nothing inside worth seeing. Eleanor glanced discreetly at Nathan. Would you like me to explain the transaction in more detail? Nathan nodded. Please. She addressed the guests with calm precision. Nearly 16 years ago, Mr. Graham became one of the earliest private investors in North Star Dynamics. The investment was made before institutional financing, before venture capital, before commercial revenue. Jason quietly muttered. Seed stage, Eleanor continued. Mr. Graham never sold his shares. He declined multiple purchase offers over the years. Jason looked stunned. There were buyout offers. Several. Nathan nodded. There were. Victoria frowned. You turned them down? Yes. Why? Nathan answered simply. I trusted Daniel. Simply. I trusted Daniel. No complicated explanation. No discussion of valuation models. Just trust. Jason almost laughed in disbelief. I've spent 20 years analyzing startups. You ignored every opportunity to diversify. Nathan nodded. I did, and it worked. Nathan looked at him. This time. Jason fell silent. He understood something important. Nathan wasn't pretending to be a financial genius. He wasn't claiming perfect judgment. He wasn't rewriting history. He acknowledged uncertainty. He had simply stayed loyal to a decision made years earlier. That honesty carried more weight than self-congratulation. Amanda spoke softly. Weren't you ever afraid? Nathan thought for a moment. Of losing the money. Yes, I already assumed it was gone. Several people frowned. Nathan continued. The day I invested, I accepted that possibility. After that, everything else felt like a bonus. Richard smiled faintly. That's an unusual way to think. Nathan shrugged. It's how engineers approach risk. Jason shook his head. No. It's how disciplined people approach risk. For the first time that evening, Jason's voice contained genuine respect. Meanwhile, servers quietly resumed moving through the garden. No one reached for another drink. Even the musicians waited. They sensed the evening had become something entirely different. Liliana looked around at the guests she had worked so hard to impress. Only an hour earlier, they had laughed every time someone joked about Nathan's old truck. Now, several of those same people were looking at him with admiration. Not because of the money, because of the way he carried it. Victoria walked closer. Nathan. He looked at her. I owe you an apology. He said nothing. I shouldn't have made fun of you. Nathan answered gently. It's all right. No, it isn't. I judged you. Nathan offered a small smile. Most people judge what they can see. She lowered her eyes. I was wrong. Nathan simply nodded. He didn't ask for more. He didn't enjoy the apology. He accepted it and let it end there. The narrator observed something else. Liliana expected Nathan to bask in the moment, to enjoy finally proving everyone wrong. Instead, he seemed almost eager for the evening to finish. He picked up the cream-colored envelope, then the certified documents. Carefully, he placed both back inside the briefcase. He closed the lid, locked it. Click. Click. The same quiet sounds that had begun this moment now seemed to bring it to a close. Liliana watched him. That's it. Nathan looked at her. What do you mean? You're just putting it away? Yes. She stared at the briefcase. $300 million. And you're closing the case like it's ordinary paperwork. Nathan rested one hand on the leather handle. For today, it is paperwork. A few guests exchanged amazed glances. The money had never been the most extraordinary thing about Nathan. his perspective was. Eleanor checked her watch. I should probably leave. Nathan thanked her again, but before she could step away, she paused. There is one more matter. Nathan's expression changed, almost imperceptibly. He knew exactly what she meant. He had hoped it wouldn't become necessary tonight. Eleanor rested one hand on the second leather portfolio carried by her associate. This folder, she spoke carefully, is unrelated to the acquisition. Jason looked puzzled. Richard frowned. Liliana stared at the unopened portfolio. Nathan remained silent. Eleanor looked directly at him. Would you like to handle that another day? Or would you prefer to address it now? Nathan lowered his eyes for a brief moment. When he looked up again, the calm determination in his face had returned. Since we're already here, I think it's time. The associate placed the second portfolio on the table. Unlike the first one, it wasn't marked with corporate documents. Across the tab in neat black lettering were two words: Graham, family. Nathan slowly reached for it. Nathan rested his hand on the second portfolio, but did not open it immediately. The warm evening breeze stirred the edges of the white tablecloth. Somewhere beyond the backyard fence, traffic continued along Clark Street, indifferent to the silence that had settled over the party. Every guest watched him. The atmosphere had changed completely. An hour earlier, they had gathered to admire expensive watches, luxury cars, and business connections. Now they were waiting to see what could possibly matter after a $300 million acquisition. Nathan looked at Eleanor Harrison. You don't have to do this. Her answer came quietly. I know. I'll leave if you ask. Nathan glanced toward Liliana. She looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence that had carried her through the evening had been replaced by uncertainty. For a brief moment, Nathan considered ending everything there. The check had already spoken for itself. He could take the briefcase, thank the guests for coming, and leave. No more embarrassment, no more confrontation. But another thought surfaced. It wasn't about revenge, it was about unfinished business. The narrator followed only Nathan's reasoning. 3 months earlier, he had discovered that silence alone could no longer protect his marriage. Silence had protected hope. It could not protect the truth. Nathan looked back at Eleanor. Please. She gave a slight nod. One of her associates placed the second portfolio on the table and stepped back. Nathan opened it. Inside were neatly organized folders separated by colored tabs. Each tab carried a label: bank records, property transfers, private investigator, electronic communications, legal notices. Liliana frowned. What is all that? Nathan answered calmly. Documents. She looked at him. What kind of documents? The kind I wish I never needed. Richard Holloway immediately recognized the organization. This wasn't a random collection of paperwork. It was litigation preparation, professional, detailed, methodical. He slowly folded his arms. Nathan removed the first folder. It was thinner than the others. He placed it on the table without opening it. Liliana. She met his eyes. I have a question. She nodded cautiously. Go ahead. About 4 months ago. Did you hire someone named Michael Brooks? Her face changed. Only slightly. But Nathan saw it. So you remember him. Victoria looked confused. Who's Michael Brooks? No one answered. Liliana looked at Nathan. He was... She searched for words. A consultant. Nathan nodded. A licensed private investigator. Silence. Jason looked from one to the other. A private investigator, Liliana quickly answered. It wasn't what you think. Nathan didn't interrupt. He simply opened the folder. Inside was a service agreement bearing the logo of Brooks Investigative Services. The first page listed a client. Liliana Graham. The assignment. Surveillance of Nathan Graham. The guests shifted uneasily. Nathan handed the agreement to Richard Holloway. Would you mind reading the first paragraph? Richard hesitated, then accepted the document. He read silently for several seconds before looking up. It authorizes surveillance. He paused. Vehicle tracking. Photography. Background investigation. Jason stared. You hired someone to investigate your own husband? Liliana immediately answered. I had reasons. Nathan remained composed. I never said you didn't. He reached for another folder. This one contains the invoices. He handed them to Richard as well. Richard reviewed the pages. 12 invoices. 3 months. He looked at Nathan. They're authentic. Victoria's expression softened. Lily. You never mentioned this. Liliana's breathing became shallower. It wasn't anyone's business. Nathan quietly agreed. It wasn't. Until tonight. He removed another folder. This one is easier. Inside were certified bank statements. Nathan laid them across the table. These belong to our joint savings account. Liliana immediately recognized them. Her shoulders stiffened. Nathan pointed toward several highlighted transactions. Do you remember these? She looked down. Large transfers. Repeated withdrawals. Amounts just below the reporting threshold that would have required automatic notifications. Richard stepped closer. He examined the highlighted entries. His legal instincts immediately recognized the pattern. He looked at Liliana. These weren't household expenses. She didn't answer. Nathan did. They were transferred into an account that I didn't know existed. Jason frowned. You found another account? Nathan nodded. My accountant did, Victoria whispered. You hired an accountant, Nathan answered. After I noticed the balances didn't match. Liliana looked sharply at him. You've been checking our accounts? Nathan met her gaze. I've always checked our accounts. The statement wasn't defensive. It was factual. The narrator revealed Nathan's memory. 3 months earlier, he had been paying property taxes online when he noticed a discrepancy. Nothing dramatic. Just a number that didn't make sense. A transfer. Then another. Then another. Nathan hadn't accused anyone. Instead, he requested statements, compared dates, reviewed records. When the inconsistencies continued, Eleanor Harrison recommended a forensic accountant. Not to start a fight, to establish facts. Facts didn't become emotional. People did. Nathan placed another folder on the table. This one contains the accountant's report. Richard accepted it. He skimmed several pages, then looked at Nathan. This documents every transfer. Nathan nodded. It also traces where the money went. Jason spoke quietly. How much? Nathan answered without looking at him. A little over $400,000. Several guests inhaled sharply. Victoria looked at Liliana. Lily, what was the money for? Liliana finally raised her voice. I don't have to explain every purchase I make. Nathan remained calm. No, you don't. But large transfers from joint accounts usually deserve a conversation. She folded her arms. I was protecting myself. Nathan accepted the answer without argument. I understand. That surprised everyone. No accusation, no sarcasm, only acknowledgement. Eleanor Harrison stepped forward. Mr. Graham. He looked at her. Would you like me to explain the legal context? Please. She addressed the guests with professional precision. Several months ago, Mr. Graham retained our firm for legal advice. No legal action was initiated at that time. Our recommendation was simple. Gather documentation. Do not make accusations. Allow the evidence to establish the facts. Richard nodded slowly. That's exactly what I would have advised. Nathan looked at the crowd. I wasn't trying to catch anyone. I was trying to understand. Liliana's eyes filled with frustration. So you investigated me, Nathan answered quietly. I verified information. There is a difference. The sentence landed harder than anyone expected. Because it was true. He had never searched her phone, never followed her, never confronted her with guesses. He had only confirmed facts that already existed. Nathan reached for the final folder he intended to reveal that evening. Its tab read Draft Petition. He rested his fingers on it. For several seconds he didn't move. The narrator observed the weight of the moment. This was the folder he had hoped would never leave Eleanor Harrison's office. It represented the point beyond which reconciliation became far more difficult. Nathan looked at Liliana. I wanted to ask you something before I ever opened this. She looked back. What? If I had come home tonight, without this check? He gently touched the cream-colored envelope resting beside the portfolio. Oh, would you still have wanted to stay married? Liliana opened her mouth. No words came. Nathan didn't press her. Her silence answered enough. He slowly opened the final folder. The first page bore the heading, Draft Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Prepared, unsigned, unfiled. Richard's eyes widened. Victoria lowered her gaze. Jason slowly set his champagne glass on the nearest table. Nathan hadn't come to the party planning to announce a divorce. He had come carrying a draft that he prayed would never need to become reality. And that realization was somehow even more powerful than the $300 million check. No one spoke after Nathan opened the draft petition. The paper itself looked ordinary. White pages, black print, a few signatures still missing. Yet it carried more emotional weight than the cashier's check lying beside it. $300 million had changed Nathan's financial future. These papers acknowledged the possible end of the life he had spent 14 years trying to build. The omniscient narrator lingered only with Nathan's thoughts. He remembered the afternoon Eleanor Harrison had first placed the draft in front of him. You don't have to file it, she had said. Then why prepare it? Because hope and preparation are not opposites. He had stared at the empty signature line for nearly 5 minutes. Finally, he pushed the document back across the table. Leave it unsigned. Eleanor nodded. I will. Nathan had left her office that day, still believing there was time. Time for conversations. Time for honesty. Time to discover that the financial discrepancies, the investigator, and the growing emotional distance all had reasonable explanations. Instead of demanding answers, he chose patience. Not because he lacked courage, because accusations built on assumptions often destroyed the very truth they sought. Now standing beneath the lights of Liliana's garden party, he looked at the unsigned petition again. It remained exactly as he had left it, prepared, but never filed. Richard Holloway broke the silence. You never intended to surprise anyone with this? Nathan looked at him. No. You brought it tonight because... Nathan finished the sentence. I had a meeting with Eleanor this afternoon. Richard nodded. So these documents were already with you? Yes. You didn't ask anyone to open them? No. Richard slowly turned toward the guests. I think that's an important detail. Several people quietly agreed. Jason Whitmore lowered his head. He replayed the evening in his mind. Nathan had arrived quietly. He had greeted everyone politely. He had never mentioned the meeting downtown, never hinted at wealth, never mentioned the law firm. Every revelation had happened only because Liliana insisted on making him the center of attention. Jason suddenly realized something uncomfortable. The humiliation everyone had expected Nathan to endure had gradually reversed itself, not because Nathan fought back, but because he never tried to fight at all. Liliana looked at the unsigned petition. You really thought about divorcing me, Nathan answered honestly. I thought about protecting both of us. She frowned. That's not the same thing. It is to me. Her voice trembled. You hired lawyers. I asked for advice. You hired accountants. I asked for facts. You investigated me. I verified information that already existed. Every answer remained calm, measured, specific. Nathan refused to exaggerate. He refused to accuse. The narrator observed the discipline behind his words. Nathan had spent decades solving engineering failures. When machinery malfunctioned, experienced engineers never blamed the first component they saw. They tested, measured, verified. Only then did they replace anything. He had approached his marriage the same way. Not because relationships were machines, because truth deserved the same respect. Eleanor stepped beside the table. If I may clarify, Nathan nodded. She addressed the gathering. When Mr. Graham first came to our office several months ago, he instructed us very clearly. She opened one of her own notes. He said, she glanced at Nathan. If I'm wrong, I want proof that I'm wrong. She closed the folder. That is an unusually responsible request. Richard smiled faintly. I wish more clients said that. Victoria looked at Nathan with growing regret. So you weren't trying to catch her? Nathan shook his head. I was hoping the evidence would prove I was worrying about nothing. Liliana slowly looked up. You hoped that... Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Nathan hesitated. Because every time I tried to discuss serious things, you treated them like inconveniences. The words were not cruel. They were quiet, which somehow made them harder to dismiss. Nathan continued. When I mentioned Daniel's company, you laughed. When I asked about the transfers, you changed the subject. When I said I thought we were drifting apart, you scheduled another dinner party. Liliana closed her eyes briefly. She remembered. Not every conversation, but enough. Enough to know he wasn't inventing them. Victoria stepped back from the stage. She suddenly felt embarrassed for every joke she had made that evening. Amanda Collins quietly set down her wine glass. No cosmetic procedure she thought could repair the damage caused by years of not listening. Jason finally spoke. Nathan. Nathan looked toward him. Can I ask you something? Of course. When did you know tonight might end like this? Nathan answered after a moment. When Liliana asked me not to park my truck in front of the house. Several guests exchanged puzzled looks. Jason frowned. That was it. Nathan nodded. Not because of the truck. Because she was worried about what strangers would think before asking how my day had gone. The sentence lingered in the warm night air. Richard quietly lowered his eyes. He had represented hundreds of divorcing couples. He had seen infidelity, fraud, violence, bitterness. But sometimes marriages ended because of something much smaller. Years of choosing appearances over conversations. Liliana finally stepped closer. For the first time all evening, she wasn't speaking through the microphone. She switched it off and placed it on the table. The small click echoed softly. She looked directly at Nathan. I didn't know. Nathan answered gently. I believe you. You believe me? I believe you didn't realize how far apart we'd become. Tears formed in her eyes. I thought... She stopped. Nathan waited patiently. I thought if we built the right life, everything else would fall into place. Nathan looked around the beautifully decorated garden. The imported flowers, the crystal glasses, the designer furniture. Everything had been arranged perfectly. Everything except the two people who lived there. You built a beautiful evening, Nathan said quietly. Liliana looked around as well. It doesn't feel beautiful anymore. No? It doesn't. No accusation, just truth. The narrator observed that Nathan felt no satisfaction. He had imagined many versions of this conversation over the previous months. In none of them had he felt victorious. Winning an argument rarely repaired a relationship. Proving someone wrong rarely healed disappointment. The money hadn't changed that. $300 million could purchase almost anything. It could not buy back years of conversations that never happened. Eleanor checked the time. Mr. Graham. Nathan turned toward her. The petition remains unsigned. Yes. It will remain that way unless you instruct us otherwise. Nathan nodded. Thank you. She returned the folder to the portfolio without another word. The gesture mattered. Nothing irreversible had happened. Not yet. Liliana watched the folder disappear. She understood what Nathan had silently protected. He had prepared for the worst, without forcing it to happen. Richard addressed Nathan. I owe you something. Nathan looked surprised. My respect. Nathan offered a modest smile. You don't owe me anything. I disagree. Richard glanced around the gathering. Most people confuse patience with weakness. They're rarely the same thing. Jason quietly nodded. So do I. One by one, several guests who had laughed earlier lowered their eyes. No one apologized again. There seemed little point. The evening had already taught them more than another apology could. Nathan closed the second portfolio. Then he picked up the cream-colored envelope. Finally, he lifted the worn leather briefcase. Everything fit inside exactly as before. The check, the certified acquisition papers, the accountant's reports, the unsigned divorce petition. To everyone else, they were life-changing documents. To Nathan, they represented something simpler. Facts. Nothing more, nothing less. As he reached for the handle, Eleanor spoke once again. There is one final matter, Mr. Graham. Nathan looked back. It concerns ownership records. He paused. What ownership records? Eleanor opened a much smaller envelope from her portfolio. The title to this house. Liliana's head snapped toward her. The guests stared in stunned silence, sensing that the evening's biggest revelation might not have happened yet. No one moved. The words, the title to this house, seemed to suspend the entire evening. Liliana looked from Eleanor Harrison to Nathan, searching for some sign that she had misunderstood. Our house? She asked quietly. Eleanor kept her tone measured. The property at 1827 North Burling Street. Liliana swallowed. Yes. Eleanor rested the smaller envelope on the table. The ownership records were updated several years ago when the mortgage was refinanced. Nathan remained silent. He had no interest in making the moment more dramatic than it already was. Richard Holloway stepped closer. May I? Eleanor nodded and handed him the certified copy. Richard adjusted his glasses and examined the first page. The property is held in the Graham Family Living Trust. He looked toward Nathan. I wasn't aware you had established one. Nathan answered calmly. It was recommended after my father passed away. Richard continued reading. The trust was established 8 years ago. He turned another page. The trustee. His eyes paused. Is Nathan Graham. Liliana frowned. And, Richard continued, the residence is listed as a trust asset. He looked toward Eleanor. This explains why the title search looked unusual. Eleanor nodded. The trust owns the property. Liliana looked confused. But we both live here. Yes, Eleanor replied. You are both beneficiaries while the marriage remains intact. Nathan watched quietly. The narrator observed that he had never hidden the trust. The documents had been signed in a lawyer's office years earlier. Liliana had attended the meeting. She simply hadn't paid much attention to the legal explanations, leaving most of the discussion to Nathan while answering emails on her phone. Eleanor continued. When the refinance was completed, the lender required the property to be transferred into the trust. Liliana shook her head. I don't remember any of this. Nathan answered gently. I know. You handled it. Yes. You never reminded me. You signed every document. The words carried no accusation, only fact. Richard looked at Nathan. So the property itself isn't in dispute? No. The trust agreement already determines how it will be managed. Jason Whitmore quietly exhaled. I've seen families spend years fighting over houses. Richard nodded. This structure avoids many of those problems. Victoria looked around the elegant backyard. So none of this changes because of... She glanced toward the briefcase. The acquisition? Nathan shook his head. No? The trust existed long before today. Amanda Collins spoke softly. You planned ahead, Nathan answered. My father always told me that preparation isn't pessimism. It's responsibility. The sentence lingered. Several guests found themselves thinking about their own lives. Insurance policies they never read. Wills they never finished. Conversations they kept postponing. Nathan hadn't prepared because he expected disaster. He had prepared because life was unpredictable. Liliana looked down at the polished stone beneath her feet. So, all these years, I assumed this house belonged to us. Nathan answered carefully. It does. She looked up. But legally, it belongs to the trust that protects both of us, Eleanor added. The trust was designed to prevent unnecessary legal complications. Liliana slowly nodded. For the first time that evening, she wasn't looking for an argument. She was trying to understand. Nathan recognized the difference. The narrator followed his thoughts. He remembered the afternoon they had closed on the house. Liliana had fallen in love with the tall windows overlooking the garden. Nathan had spent more time asking questions about taxes, insurance, structural inspections, and legal ownership. She had teased him afterward. You make buying a house sound like assembling an engine, he had smiled. Both are expensive if something important gets overlooked. At the time, she laughed. Tonight, she finally understood why he had insisted on reading every page. Richard returned the title documents to Eleanor. I don't think I've ever seen someone so thoroughly prepared. Nathan smiled faintly. I work in maintenance. Richard laughed quietly. I suppose that's true. Nathan continued. When you're responsible for keeping hospitals running, you learn that waiting until something breaks is usually the most expensive strategy. Jason nodded. And you applied that philosophy to everything. I tried. Victoria looked at Nathan with genuine curiosity. Were you always like this? Nathan thought for a moment. I wasn't always patient. What changed? My father. Several guests listened carefully. He repaired railroad equipment for almost 40 years. Nathan smiled at the memory. When I was 12, I asked him why he always carried extra tools. He said, Nathan paused, because emergencies never arrive after you're ready. The sentence settled over the gathering. No one laughed. It wasn't meant to be clever. It was simply wisdom earned through experience. Liliana looked towards the old Ford F-150 parked down the street. I used to hate that truck. Nathan followed her gaze. I know. I thought it made us look... She stopped herself. Nathan finished gently. Ordinary. She nodded. Yes? Nathan smiled. I've always liked ordinary. She looked back at him. Why? Because ordinary things usually don't pretend to be anything else. Silence returned. Not uncomfortable, reflective. The musicians quietly resumed playing in the background, choosing a slow instrumental piece that blended naturally into the evening. Guests no longer stood in tight social circles. Instead, many simply remained where they were thinking. Jason approached Nathan. "I owe you another apology." Nathan looked at him. "You already apologized." "This one's different." Nathan waited. "I've spent my career evaluating founders. I thought I could judge character in minutes." He shook his head. "I completely misjudged yours." Nathan extended his hand. "We all make judgments." Jason accepted this handshake. "Not all of us admit it." Victoria stepped forward next. "I've sold homes worth $20 million. She looked around the backyard. "I used to think success had a certain look." Nathan smiled politely. "And now? I think I was selling appearances more than achievements." Amanda quietly added, "I spent years helping people change what they saw in the mirror." She looked toward Nathan. "I probably should have paid more attention to what couldn't be seen." Richard folded his arms. "It's remarkable." Everyone looked at him. "This evening began with jokes about an old truck." He glanced toward the briefcase. "It became a lesson about evidence." Then he looked directly at Nathan. "And not once did you raise your voice." Nathan answered simply, "I've never found volume to be persuasive." Richard smiled. "As a lawyer, I wish more people believed that." Liliana remained near the stage. She hadn't spoken for several minutes. The narrator observed Nathan noticing the distance between them, not physical distance, emotional distance. For years they had occupied the same house while slowly living in different worlds. Money had not created that gap. Tonight had only exposed it. Nathan picked up his briefcase. "I think it's time for me to leave." Several guests looked surprised. Jason asked, "You're just leaving?" Nathan nodded. "It's been a long day." Liliana looked up quickly. "You're going?" "Yes." She hesitated. "Can we talk?" Nathan met her eyes. "We will." "When?" "Tomorrow." "Not tonight." Nathan looked around the garden. "Tonight has already said enough." He stepped down from the stage. No cameras followed him now. No laughter accompanied his steps. The same people who had watched him walk toward the stage expecting entertainment now quietly moved aside to clear a path. As Nathan reached the stone walkway leading toward the front gate, Eleanor Harrison caught up beside him. She spoke softly enough that only he could hear. "I can file the petition first thing Monday." Nathan looked ahead. The cool night air felt strangely peaceful after the emotional storm of the evening. He thought carefully before answering. "Not yet." Eleanor studied his expression. "Are you certain?" Nathan nodded once. "I'm certain of one thing." "What's that?" "The truth needed to come first." He paused. "What happens after that deserves at least one honest conversation." Eleanor accepted the answer without question. Together they continued toward the gate, leaving behind a garden full of people who had arrived believing wealth was measured by appearances, and departed wondering whether true wealth had always been something much quieter. The following morning, Chicago woke beneath a pale gray sky. A light rain had washed the streets before sunrise, leaving the sidewalks clean and the trees glistening beneath the first hints of daylight. Nathan Graham was already awake. At 5:10 a.m., the familiar alarm on his old Casio watch sounded exactly as it always had. He turned it off, sat quietly on the edge of the bed in the guest room, and listened. The house was silent. No music, no voices, no caterers collecting tables, only the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The omniscient narrator remained close to Nathan's thoughts. He had slept surprisingly well, not because the previous evening had gone well, because there was nothing left to hide. Truth, even painful truth, often weighed less than uncertainty. Nathan dressed in jeans, a gray work shirt, and the same brown boots he had worn hundreds of times before. He carried his coffee onto the back patio. The expensive decorations from the party remained scattered across the lawn. Wilted white orchids lay beside empty champagne glasses. Several folding tables had not yet been collected. A chandelier hung crooked beneath the tent after the overnight wind. The garden looked strangely honest. Without the lights and music, it was simply a backyard again. Nathan quietly began folding chairs. No one had asked him to. He simply noticed work that needed to be done. Half an hour later, Liliana opened the patio door. She stopped when she saw him stacking rental chairs. "You don't have to do that." Nathan kept working. "They'll be easier for the rental company to collect." She stepped outside. "You barely slept." "I slept enough." She watched him for several moments. "I made coffee." "So did I." Neither smiled. Neither argued. It was the calmest conversation they had shared in months. Liliana finally spoke. "I kept thinking about something you said." Nathan looked up. "Which part?" "Truth needed to come first." He nodded. "I've been wondering." She searched for the right words. "When did you stop trusting me?" Nathan rested another folded chair against the stack before answering. "I didn't stop trusting you in one day. It happened a little at a time." She lowered her eyes. "I think the same thing happened to me." Nathan didn't interrupt. "I stopped asking what made you happy. I only asked whether you looked successful." The sentence lingered between them. Nathan recognized something different in her voice, not defensiveness, reflection. He quietly said, "I noticed." Liliana took a slow breath. "I know." A moving truck from the rental company arrived at the curb. 2 workers stepped into the backyard. Nathan greeted them with a friendly smile and helped load tables without mentioning who owned the house. The workers thanked him, assuming he was simply another laborer helping clean up after an event. Nathan never corrected them. When the truck left, Liliana shook her head. "You could have told them." "Told them what?" "That this is your house." Nathan looked genuinely puzzled. "They didn't ask." She almost laughed. For the first time in days, a faint smile appeared. You really don't care what people assume." Nathan thought about it. "I care what people who know me think." He looked towards the street. "I've never worried much about strangers." Later that morning, Nathan drove downtown. Not to a luxury dealership, not to a private bank. Instead, he stopped at the same commercial maintenance office where he had worked as an independent contractor for years. The receptionist looked up. "Morning, Nathan." "Morning, Lisa." She handed him a clipboard. "Couple of emergency jobs came in." Nathan accepted it without hesitation. The first request involved a university laboratory whose backup ventilation system had failed overnight. The second came from a children's rehabilitation hospital experiencing problems with a rooftop chiller. Nathan looked over both assignments. "I'll take the hospital first." Lisa smiled. "I figured you would." She had no idea about the acquisition. Nathan hadn't told anyone. By noon, he stood on the roof of St. Catherine Children's Rehabilitation Hospital, wearing safety glasses and work gloves. The wind was stronger there than it had been the previous afternoon. He removed a service panel and began testing electrical connections. One of the younger technicians working nearby glanced toward him. "You ever think about retiring?" Nathan smiled. "Sometimes." "I know I would." The technician laughed. "If I ever made serious money, you'd never see me on another rooftop." Nathan tightened a loose terminal. "What would you do instead?" "I don't know." "Travel." "Buy a yacht." "Sleep." Nathan chuckled quietly. "Sounds expensive." The technician laughed. "That's the point." Nathan returned to work. The narrator revealed his thoughts. $300 million hadn't changed what he enjoyed. He still liked solving problems. He still enjoyed hearing machinery return to life after hours of careful diagnosis. Money removed necessity. It didn't erase purpose. By mid-afternoon, Nathan completed the repair. The hospital's facilities manager met him near the elevator. "You saved us again." Nathan shook his head. "The equipment was worth saving." The manager laughed. "You engineers are all the same." Nathan wasn't sure whether that was true, but he accepted the compliment anyway. As he climbed back into his old Ford F-150, his phone rang. "Daniel Mercer." Nathan answered. "Hey." Daniel's voice carried its usual energy, despite the time difference. "I just landed." "I heard. Eleanor called me." Nathan smiled faintly. "I figured she would." Daniel became quiet. "I saw some videos." Nathan frowned slightly. "Videos? The party?" Nathan sighed. "I forgot people record everything." "There are already clips online." Nathan leaned back in the driver's seat. "I was hoping that wouldn't happen." "You never wanted publicity." "I still don't." Daniel laughed softly. "Too late." Nathan looked through the windshield at the Chicago skyline. "What are people saying?" Daniel answered honestly. "Mostly that they can't believe someone sat on a $300 million investment while driving an old truck." Nathan smiled. "The truck's getting more attention than the company." Daniel laughed loudly. "You're probably right." Then his tone became more serious. "I've been thinking." Nathan waited. "I owe you more than a check." "You don't owe me anything." "I do." "No." "You built the company." Daniel was silent for several seconds. Finally he said, "I want to create something." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something? A foundation?" Nathan frowned. "For what? Engineering students? Young entrepreneurs? People with good ideas who don't know the right investors?" Nathan looked out across the parking lot. He remembered himself at 26. A rented apartment, a small savings account, a friend with an impossible dream. "What would you call it?" Daniel answered immediately. "The Graham Innovation Foundation." Nathan laughed. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because I don't want my name on a building." Daniel sighed dramatically. "You've become impossible." "I've always been impossible." "No. You've always been stubborn." Nathan smiled. "That's probably true," Daniel continued. "Think about it." "I will." After the call ended, Nathan remained in the truck for several minutes. The idea stayed with him. Not the name, the purpose. Helping people who reminded him of the young engineers he and Daniel had once been. People whose greatest obstacle wasn't talent, it was opportunity. That evening, Nathan returned home just before sunset. Liliana was sitting alone on the back patio. The garden had finally been cleared. Only 2 coffee mugs rested on the table. She looked up as he approached. "You went to work?" "I did." She stared at him in disbelief. "The day after everything that happened." Nathan set down his briefcase. "There were children waiting for that cooling system." Liliana slowly shook her head. "I don't think I'll ever completely understand you." Nathan pulled out the chair across from her. "You don't have to understand everything." He sat down. "We only need to start telling each other the truth." For the first time in many years, neither of them reached for a phone. Neither tried to impress anyone. They simply sat together as the sun disappeared beyond the Chicago skyline, knowing that the hardest conversation of their marriage had not happened at the party. It was only beginning now. 3 days passed before the first reporter found Nathan Graham. The videos from Liliana's garden party had spread far beyond Chicago. Most of the clips were less than a minute long. One showed Nathan opening the worn leather briefcase. Another captured Richard Holloway quietly reading the amount on the cashier's check. The most widely shared clip lasted only 12 seconds, Nathan standing calmly beneath the string lights. Liliana asking, "What is this?" Nathan answering, "You asked me to open the briefcase." Millions of people watched the exchange without knowing anything about the years that had led to it. To many viewers, it looked like a story about sudden wealth. To Nathan, it had never been about the money. It had been about choices. His phone remained on silent throughout most of the week. Unknown numbers appeared every hour. Television producers, podcast hosts, financial magazines, business journals. A documentary filmmaker even left a voicemail offering what he called a life-changing opportunity. Nathan deleted every message. On Thursday morning, while replacing a faulty control module inside a university engineering building, Lisa, from the maintenance office, climbed the service stairs carrying a clipboard. "Nathan." He looked up from the open electrical cabinet. "Morning? You've got visitors." He frowned. "Here. They're waiting downstairs." "Who?" "One reporter. And another man who says he represents a national newspaper." Nathan sighed quietly. "I'll be down in a few minutes." Lisa smiled. "I figured you'd say that." When Nathan reached the lobby, a young woman in her early 30s immediately introduced herself. "Mr. Graham?" "Yes." "My name is Emily Carter." She extended her hand. "I'm with the Chicago Tribune." Nathan shook her hand politely. Beside her stood a middle-aged photographer who kept his camera lowered. Emily spoke first. "I know you've declined every interview." "I have." "I'd like to ask one more time." Nathan smiled apologetically. "I'm not interested in becoming a public story." "I understand." She paused. "But I don't think people are interested because of the money." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "They aren't?" Emily shook her head. "They're interested because of how you handled it." Nathan considered that. She continued. "I've interviewed CEOs worth billions. I've interviewed lottery winners. I've interviewed athletes who signed record contracts. They all wanted to talk. You don't." Nathan laughed softly. "I've never enjoyed being the center of attention." Emily smiled. "I noticed." She reached into her bag. "I'd like to make you an offer." Nathan waited. "One interview. No cameras? No television. No discussion about the amount of money." He looked surprised. "Then what would we discuss?" "You?" Nathan shook his head. "I'm not that interesting." Emily answered immediately. "I think that's exactly why people want to hear from you." The narrator observed Nathan thinking through the request. He wasn't afraid of reporters. He disliked unnecessary publicity, but he also understood something else. Thousands of people had already formed opinions based on 12-second video clips. Perhaps one conversation could provide context, not to defend himself, to explain the principles behind his decisions. "When?" Emily asked. "This afternoon." Nathan looked toward the maintenance supervisor. "I finish at 4. "I can wait." She did. At precisely 4:30, they met in a quiet corner of a neighborhood coffee shop overlooking the Chicago River. The photographer remained outside. No cameras, no bright lights, only 2 cups of coffee and a digital recorder resting between them. Emily pressed the record button. "My first question is simple." Nathan nodded. "Why didn't you celebrate after receiving $300 million? Nathan looked out the window before answering. "I was grateful." "That's different from celebrating." "How? Gratitude doesn't always need an audience." Emily wrote something in her notebook. "Fair enough. Another question." "Go ahead." "People online keep calling you humble." Nathan smiled. "I've never liked that word." Emily looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because people often confuse humility with pretending success doesn't exist." He folded his hands on the table. "I know exactly what happened. I know what the investment became. I'm proud of the decision." "So you're not pretending it isn't important?" "No. I just don't think it changes who I am." Emily nodded slowly. "What does change a person?" Nathan answered without hesitation. The habits they practice every day. She looked interested. Can you explain? Nathan pointed toward the coffee shop window. See that man sweeping the sidewalk? Emily turned. An elderly maintenance worker pushed leaves into a neat pile. If someone handed him $300 million today, Nathan continued, he'd probably still know how to sweep tomorrow. Emily smiled. Because that's who he is. Nathan nodded. Money can remove pressure. It rarely removes character. Emily leaned back. No wonder that quote is already everywhere online. Nathan frowned. What quote? Money reveals the person who was already there. Nathan laughed quietly. I didn't realize anyone recorded that. They did. Emily paused. I'd like to ask about your wife. Nathan's smile disappeared. He remained silent for several seconds. The narrator followed only his thoughts. He knew this question would come. He had decided before arriving that there was one line he would never cross. Emily noticed his hesitation. We don't have to discuss it. Nathan shook his head. No. I'll answer. He chose every word carefully. Liliana made mistakes. So did I. Emily looked surprised. What mistakes did you make? I assumed silence could solve problems. She waited. It can't. He continued. I thought if I worked harder, if I stayed patient, eventually we'd understand each other again. He smiled sadly. I should have insisted on harder conversations much earlier. Emily lowered her pen. You don't sound angry. I'm disappointed. There's a difference. Are you getting divorced? Nathan looked down at his coffee. The paperwork remains unsigned. So there's still hope? Nathan thought for a long moment. I believe if every honest conversation deserves to happen before any final decision. Emily nodded respectfully. I appreciate that answer. She changed subjects. I heard Daniel Mercer wants to establish a foundation. Nathan looked up. He talks too much. Emily laughed. So it's true? We've discussed helping young engineers. What kind of help? Nathan's eyes brightened slightly. Scholarships, seed funding, mentorship. Not just for people with perfect resumes. Emily leaned forward. What do you mean? Nathan smiled. When Daniel started, every investor asked what his company already had. I was more interested in what it might become. Emily quietly repeated the sentence in her notebook. What it might become. Nathan nodded. Potential deserves a chance. The interview lasted almost another hour. They discussed engineering, his father, problem-solving, patience. Never once did Nathan mention the exact amount of the acquisition. Again, as they stood outside the coffee shop, Emily switched off her recorder. I have one last question. Nathan smiled. I thought we were finished. We are. This one's off the record. All right? She looked directly at him. If you could go back to the beginning of that evening, would you still open the briefcase? Nathan didn't answer immediately. He watched the river flowing beneath the bridge. I would have preferred to open it at home. He finally smiled. But once the truth was asked for, I don't think hiding it would have helped anyone. Emily extended her hand once more. Thank you. Nathan shook it. For what? For reminding me that the most interesting stories usually aren't about money. Nathan walked back toward his old Ford F-150. As he unlocked the driver's door, his phone vibrated. A text message. From Liliana. Can we have dinner tonight? No lawyers, no documents, just us. Nathan read the message twice. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he looked through the windshield, remembering the promise he had made to Eleanor Harrison. The truth first. Then one honest conversation. He slowly started the engine of the old truck, knowing that the most important decision of his life was no longer about money investments or legal papers. It was about whether two people who had forgotten how to listen could still find their way back to each other. Nathan arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. It wasn't an expensive place. He chose a quiet neighborhood bistro overlooking the Chicago River, somewhere neither of them had visited in years. Before promotions, dinner parties, and endless networking events had filled their calendar, they used to come there after work simply because the owner made homemade bread every afternoon. The owner recognized Nathan immediately. "It's been a long time." "It has." "The usual table?" Nathan smiled. "If it's available." "It always is for you." Nathan thanked him and sat by the window. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm. Water taxis crossed the river. Office workers hurried toward train stations. Cyclists wove through traffic. Life had continued untouched by the drama that had consumed the previous week. The omniscient narrator followed Nathan's thoughts. He wasn't rehearsing arguments. He wasn't planning speeches. He had only one goal: to listen as carefully as he hoped to be heard. At exactly 7 o'clock, Liliana walked through the door. She looked different. Not because of her clothes. She wore a simple navy dress instead of designer evening wear. There were no diamonds, no elaborate hairstyle, no carefully staged entrance. She looked tired, honest. She spotted Nathan and walked over quietly. "Hi." Nathan stood. "Hi." For a moment, neither knew whether to hug or shake hands. They settled for a small smile before sitting across from one another. A server brought water and menus. Neither opened them. Finally, Liliana broke the silence. "I almost canceled." Nathan nodded. "I almost did too." She looked surprised. "Really?" "I wasn't sure either of us was ready." She folded her hands together. "I'm still not sure." Nathan appreciated the honesty. "Neither am I." The server returned. They ordered simple meals: grilled salmon for Nathan, chicken with vegetables for Liliana. When the server left, the silence returned. This time it felt less uncomfortable, more patient. Liliana looked out the window before speaking. "I watched the videos." Nathan smiled faintly. "So did half the country." She shook her head. "I didn't watch everyone else's. I watched mine." Nathan understood. She wasn't talking about social media. She meant watching herself. "I kept stopping every few seconds." She swallowed. "I couldn't believe the way I sounded." Nathan remained quiet. "I always thought I was teasing you." She looked down. "I never realized how often I made you the joke." Nathan answered gently. "I don't think you intended to hurt me in the beginning." "No, I didn't." She took a slow breath. It became normal. Nathan nodded. "I know. And that's the worst part." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "It became normal." Nathan looked at the table for a moment. "Pain often does." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The server arrived with fresh bread. The interruption gave them both time to breathe. After he left, Liliana looked at Nathan again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you stop loving me?" Nathan answered without hesitation. "No." She stared at him. "Then why did you prepare divorce papers?" He considered the question carefully. "Because love and trust aren't exactly the same thing." She lowered her eyes. "I suppose they're not." "I loved you enough to hope I was wrong." He paused. "But I also respected myself enough to prepare if I wasn't." Liliana slowly nodded. "I understand that now." Nathan noticed she didn't argue. She wasn't trying to defend herself. She was trying to understand. That alone made the conversation different from so many they had shared during the previous few years. The food arrived. For several minutes, they ate quietly. The silence no longer demanded to be filled. Eventually, Liliana smiled faintly. You know something strange? Nathan looked up. What? I spent years trying to make us look successful. She laughed softly at herself. And the only thing people remember now, she shook her head, is your old truck. Nathan laughed for the first time that evening. I heard it's become famous. I think it has. She smiled too. The internet even gave it a nickname. Nathan raised an eyebrow. I'm almost afraid to ask. The $300 million pickup. Nathan laughed harder. I've heard worse. Their laughter faded naturally. Neither forced the moment to continue. Liliana became serious again. I've apologized for what happened at the party. Nathan nodded. You have. But I don't think I've apologized for everything. He waited. I stopped seeing you. She looked directly at him. I saw your clothes. Your truck. Your job. I stopped seeing the man. Nathan didn't interrupt. I measured success by people who talked the loudest. She smiled sadly. You were becoming more successful every year. I just wasn't measuring the right things. Nathan took a sip of water. I wasn't perfect either. She frowned. What do you mean? I should have insisted we deal with problems much earlier. You tried. Not enough. She shook her head. I wouldn't have listened. You don't know that. I do. The certainty in her voice surprised even herself. She looked toward the river. I was addicted. Nathan waited. To approval. The admission hung between them. I wanted people to admire us. She laughed quietly. No. I wanted people to admire me. Nathan recognized how difficult those words were for her. He didn't minimize them. He simply listened. I kept thinking, to if everyone else thought I had a perfect life. Maybe eventually I'd believe it too. Nathan quietly said, That sounds exhausting. It was. The server cleared their plates. Neither had eaten very much. He asked whether they wanted dessert. Both declined. After he left, Liliana reached into her handbag. Nathan watched her remove a small velvet box. His expression remained calm. She placed it on the table. I found this. Nathan looked at it. Inside lay his wedding ring. She had taken it off the night after the party, believing their marriage had ended. I shouldn't have left it on the dresser. Nathan looked at the ring, but didn't touch it. Liliana closed the box again. I'm not asking you to put it back on. I'm asking you not to decide tonight. Nathan nodded slowly. I wasn't planning to. She looked relieved. I've started seeing a therapist. Nathan hadn't expected that. I had my first appointment yesterday. She smiled nervously. I spent almost the whole hour talking. The therapist finally asked one question. Nathan waited. When was the last time you listened instead? She looked down. I didn't have an answer. Nathan could see she wasn't telling him this to impress him. She was telling him because it had genuinely affected her. I think that's a good question. So do I. The omniscient narrator observed Nathan reaching a quiet conclusion. People could apologize. People could cry. People could promise to change. None of those things proved anything. Only consistent actions did. Engineering had taught him that. Life had confirmed it. Nathan gently slid the velvet box back across the table. Keep it. Liliana looked surprised. You don't want it? Not yet. She nodded. I understand. If we're going to rebuild anything, Nathan continued, it can't start with jewelry. It has to start with honesty. She smiled through tired eyes. I can do that, Nathan answered carefully. I hope so. They left the restaurant together. Outside, the evening air was cool. Neither reached for the other's hand. Neither spoke during the short walk to the parking lot. When they reached their cars, Liliana stopped. So, Nathan looked at her. What happens now? He thought about the question for a long moment. Then he answered with the same calm certainty that had guided him throughout the past week. We don't make promises. We build habits. She nodded. One day at a time. One conversation at a time. Liliana smiled. I think that's slower. Nathan unlocked the old Ford F-150. It usually is. As he climbed inside, his phone vibrated. A message from Eleanor Harrison. No filing has been made. The petition remains unsigned. Nathan read it once before placing the phone on the passenger seat. He started the truck. The familiar engine came to life immediately. For the first time in months, Nathan wasn't driving toward a courtroom, a lawyer's office, or another difficult confrontation. He was driving toward an uncertain future. And for the first time in a long while, uncertainty no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something that still held the possibility of hope. 1 year later, the old Ford F-150 still occupied the same parking space outside a brick engineering building on the north side of Chicago. Its paint had faded a little more. The driver's seat had another small tear near the edge. The Casio watch on Nathan Graham's wrist still buzzed every morning at 5:10. Some things he believed earned the right to grow old with dignity. The omniscient narrator observed Nathan's thoughts as he locked the truck and looked up at the modest sign mounted above the entrance. Graham Innovation Foundation. The name had taken months to accept. Daniel Mercer had refused every alternative Nathan suggested. It's your name, Daniel had insisted. No. It's your example. Nathan eventually agreed on one condition. There would be no large portrait in the lobby, no statue, no executive office overlooking the city. The foundation would exist for the people walking through its doors, not for the man whose name appeared outside. Inside the building looked nothing like a corporate headquarters. The reception area displayed prototypes built by engineering students, solar-powered irrigation systems, affordable water purification devices, medical equipment designed for rural clinics, energy storage concepts created by recent college graduates. Every invention represented an idea that had almost been overlooked, exactly the kind of ideas Nathan believed deserved another chance. A young receptionist smiled as he entered. Good morning, Mr. Graham. Morning, Emily. The scholarship committee is already here. I'll be there in a minute. And Daniel arrived early. Nathan laughed quietly. That's unusual. He brought donuts. Then something important must be happening. Emily smiled. He said that same thing. Nathan walked through the building, greeting interns, engineers, and volunteers by name. Very few addressed him as Mr. Graham. Most simply called him Nathan. That was how he preferred it. The conference room overlooked a small workshop where university students tested prototype machines. Daniel stood beside the window holding a coffee cup. You were right. Nathan removed his jacket. About what? We should have bought more donuts. Nathan laughed. How many applications? Daniel handed him a folder. 3,412. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Last year, 900. He smiled. I guess people heard about us. Nathan looked through the applications. Each folder contained grades recommendation letters, financial statements, and handwritten essays. He paused at one. A 23-year-old mechanical engineering student from rural Illinois had designed a low-cost emergency power system for volunteer fire departments. Nathan smiled. This one? Daniel looked over his shoulder. You haven't even read half the file. I've read enough. What caught your attention? Nathan pointed toward a sentence in the student's essay. I built it because nobody else was solving the problem. Daniel smiled. That sounds familiar. It should. For the next 3 hours, they interviewed applicants. Nathan asked almost no questions about grades. Instead, he asked things like, "What problem are you trying to solve? What did you learn when your first prototype failed? If this idea never makes you wealthy, will you still build it?" Some applicants answered confidently. Others struggled. Nathan wasn't searching for perfection. He was searching for persistence. Around noon, Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You know," Nathan looked up, "you've become exactly what you invested in." Nathan frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel smiled. "You invested in one impossible idea. Now you're investing in hundreds." Nathan looked through the conference room window. Young engineers were laughing while trying to repair a failed prototype. One machine refused to start. Another student grabbed a wrench. Nathan smiled to himself. Failure had always been part of engineering. The important part was what happened next. That afternoon, after the interviews ended, Nathan drove across the city. Not to a bank, not to a luxury dealership. He drove to the commercial maintenance company where he had spent years working as an independent contractor. Lisa looked up from the reception desk. "I was wondering when you'd stop by." Nathan smiled. "I brought lunch." She laughed. "You always bring sandwiches." "They're good sandwiches." Several former co-workers gathered around the break room. They talked about new building codes, faulty boilers, impossible deadlines, and the Cubs' disappointing season. No one treated Nathan differently. He had insisted on that. When someone jokingly asked why a man worth hundreds of millions still carried his own toolbox, Nathan answered exactly as he always did. "It weighs the same no matter how much money you have." The room erupted in laughter. Later, he walked through the maintenance workshop with Frank Donovan, the supervisor, who had hired Nathan nearly 18 years earlier. Frank shook his head. "I still remember your first day. I remember breaking the freight elevator." Nathan laughed. "You fixed it." "It took 6 hours." Frank stopped beside the old tool cabinets. "You know, I've had reporters call me." Nathan looked surprised. "What did they ask?" "They wanted to know whether I always knew you'd become rich." Nathan smiled. "What did you tell them?" Frank didn't hesitate. "I told them they were asking the wrong question." Nathan waited. "I always knew you'd become dependable." He folded his arms. The money showed up later. Nathan felt unexpectedly emotional, not because of the compliment, because it came from someone who had known him before any investment succeeded, before headlines, before interviews, before anyone cared about the old truck. As evening approached, Nathan drove toward Lake Michigan. He parked near the shoreline and walked alone along the water. The skyline reflected the setting sun. Chicago looked exactly as it had the day he first arrived after college. Only he had changed. Or perhaps he hadn't. The narrator lingered on that thought. People often assumed dramatic events transformed lives overnight. Nathan knew better. Character was usually built quietly over thousands of ordinary mornings. Money simply arrived one afternoon. His phone vibrated. A message from Liliana. "Dinner's ready. No rush." Nathan smiled. Much had changed during the past year. The divorce petition remained permanently unsigned. Rebuilding trust had taken months. There had been uncomfortable conversations, counseling sessions, long walks without phones, shared breakfasts before work. No dramatic declarations, no promises they couldn't keep, only habits. Exactly as Nathan had said outside the restaurant. One conversation at a time. Liliana had left the event planning firm she once worked for. She now coordinated fundraising events for children's hospitals and educational charities, quietly using the organizational skills she had once devoted almost entirely to social status. She rarely appeared in photographs anymore. When reporters occasionally asked about the party that had gone viral, she always answered the same way. It was the worst night of my life. Then she added, "It also forced me to become someone better." Nathan never corrected her. He knew change was measured by actions, not statements. As darkness settled over the lake, Nathan looked down at the faded Casio watch on his wrist. The strap had finally begun to crack. He smiled. Maybe it's time. Not for an expensive replacement. Just another simple watch that told the truth every second of every day. He slipped his hands into his pockets and looked across the water one last time before returning to his truck. The old engine started on the first turn of the key. As always, he drove home through the glowing streets of Chicago, passing luxury cars, crowded restaurants, towering office buildings, and neighborhoods where people chased dreams of every size. Some chased fortune. Some chased recognition. Some chased approval. Nathan had learned that none of those pursuits meant much without peace waiting at home. When he pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Liliana opened the front door before he reached it. "How was your day?" Nathan smiled. "It was a good day." She smiled back. "I'm listening." Those two words meant more to Nathan than the largest cashier's check he would ever receive, because in the end, the greatest investment of his life had never been measured in dollars. It had been measured in trust, patience, quiet preparation, and the courage to let truth speak before pride ever could. Sometimes life doesn't reveal who we are during moments of comfort. It reveals us when we are misunderstood, underestimated, or treated unfairly. Nathan never won because he had more money. He won because he refused to let anger make decisions that patience could make better. He prepared, carefully respected the truth, and allowed facts, not emotions, to speak for him. In the end, his greatest victory wasn't the fortune he received, but the character he never lost. Many of us will never hold a $300 million check, but all of us will face moments when others judge us by appearances, job titles, or possessions. Those moments test whether we seek validation from strangers or confidence from our own values. The strongest response is often the quietest one, especially when it is supported by honesty, preparation, and integrity. Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance, your job, or your circumstances? Or have you ever realized you misjudged someone who turned out to be extraordinary? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to read your experience and hear what lesson it taught you. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story explores another unforgettable journey, where patience, courage, and truth change